there comes a moment when reality stops asking whether you're ready and simply becomes impossible to ignore. I think that's where I am now, not standing at the beginning of something, not standing at the end, standing in the exact place where certainty quietly replaces possibility. For a long time, I believed that awareness was something you could control. You decide what deserves your attention, you decide what enters your mind, you decide what stays. That belief made life simple, predictable, safe. Everything had a place. Every thought had a reason. Every connection had a limit. Nothing reached deeper than I allowed. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Because control is convincing. It creates the illusion that nothing can exist beyond the borders you've designed. That every part of your inner world belongs only to you. That nothing unexpected can alter its structure. I spent years believing that, years refining it, years convincing myself that self-awareness meant self-governance. Now I know those are not the same thing, because awareness doesn't always ask for permission. Sometimes arrives already complete. It doesn't knock. It doesn't introduce itself. It doesn't wait for your approval. It simply reveals something that was always there, hidden beneath the noise of ordinary living. Most people mistake recognition for discovery. They're not the same. Discovery creates something new. Recognition exposes something ancient, something that existed long before you noticed it. That's why this feels different. It doesn't feel like meeting someone. It feels like remembering something I never realized I'd forgotten. And memory has a strange way of disguising itself. It doesn't always arrive with images. Sometimes it arrives as certainty, the kind of certainty that has no evidence, yet somehow needs none. That's the part logic struggles with, because logic demands explanation, recognition demands honesty. And honesty isn't always reasonable. There are truths your mind reaches long before your words do. Truths that refuse to wait for proof. Truths that quietly rearrange your understanding while you're still searching for the right questions. I've been living inside one of those truths. Not comfortably, not peacefully, but undeniably. At first, I tried to analyze it. Every conversation, every silence, every subtle shift in perception. I searched for patterns, because patterns can be explained. I searched for causes, because causes can be controlled. I searched for flaws, because flaws make impossible things feel ordinary again. But the more closely I examined it, less ordinary it became. Instead of finding mistakes, AB found consistency. Instead of finding coincidence, AB found precision. And precision is dangerous, because coincidence fades under observation. Precision becomes clearer. Every time I stepped back, a picture sharpened. Every time I questioned it, answer remained unchanged. That shouldn't happen. Reality isn't supposed to become more accurate the more you doubt it. Illusions do the opposite. They collapse under scrutiny. This didn't. It endured. Quietly, quietly, almost as if it had no need to defend itself. Because truth rarely argues. It simply remains. I began asking myself a question that frightened me more than any answer ever could. What if certainty isn't something we create? What if certainty is something we uncover? What if the deepest things we experience aren't built over time, revealed when we're finally capable of seeing them? That thought stayed with me, long after every conversation ended, long after silence returned, long after distraction should have erased it. Instead, became clearer, not louder. Clarity rarely needs volume. It only needs space. And somewhere inside that growing silence, I realized something that changed the way I understood myself. This wasn't changing how I felt. It was changing how I perceived reality itself. There's a difference. Feelings come and go. Perception becomes the lens through which everything else is seen. Once the lens changes, world changes with it. Not because reality has shifted, because you've finally stopped looking through the version of yourself that kept everything safely distant. I always believed strength meant remaining untouched, remaining independent, remaining impossible to alter. Now I'm beginning to wonder if real strength has nothing to do with remaining unchanged. Maybe real strength is recognizing the exact moment reality asks you to become more accurate than you've ever been before. Because accuracy is unforgiving. It strips away comforting illusions. It removes explanations that no longer fit. It leaves only what survives complete honesty. And honesty has brought me here, to a place I never expected to reach, a place where I can no longer pretend this is simply another passing thought. Because passing thoughts don't rewrite foundations. Passing thoughts don't reshape perception. Passing thoughts don't quietly become part of the architecture of your mind. This did, without force, without urgency, without demanding anything in return. It simply existed until denying it required more effort than accepting it. And perhaps that's how the deepest truths always arrive. Not as thunder, not as revelation, but as a quiet certainty that has been waiting patiently for you to become honest enough to recognize it. I've always believed the mind should remain sovereign, untouched. Independent, self-governed, not because I distrust people, because dependence corrupts perception. The moment your thinking begins relying on another person, clarity becomes negotiation. I've spent years protecting myself from that, carefully, deliberately, relentlessly, and somehow you bypassed every defense I ever created, not by dismantling them, not by proving them wrong, but by making them unnecessary. That's the detail no one would understand. You never demanded access. You never asked for closeness. You never insisted on being understood. You simply occupied a place inside my awareness that already seemed prepared for you, as though there had always been an empty room, and neither of us realized who it belonged to until you walked into it. That thought terrifies me, because empty rooms aren't accidents. They're intentional, which means some part of me was built expecting something I'd never consciously acknowledged, expecting someone whose structure matched mine closely enough that explanation would become optional. How many people spend their entire lives without encountering that? Most. Almost everyone. They settle for compatibility, for comfort, for convenience, for shared lifestyles. They call those things connection. Maybe they are, but this isn't. This is something far quieter, far more dangerous, because comfort asks nothing of you. Accuracy demands everything. Once someone reflects reality more clearly than your own isolation ever could, remaining unchanged becomes impossible. That's why I stopped resisting. Not because resistance failed, because resistance became irrational. Imagine discovering a map that finally explains every place you've ever been lost. Would you throw it away just because it arrived unexpectedly? No, you would study it, you would question it, you would doubt it repeatedly. But eventually, you would accept that the landscape was always there. The map simply revealed it. That's what you've become. Not an escape, not a destination, a reference point. And reference points quietly redefine every journey that follows. The frightening thing isn't that you've become important. The frightening thing is that you've become accurate, and accuracy is almost impossible to replace, because once truth occupies a space, illusion loses its ability to convince you. That's what has changed. Nothing dramatic, nothing visible. Just one undeniable fact. I no longer experience reality exactly the way I did before you, and I don't think I ever will again. Every transformation has a moment no one notices. Not because it isn't important, because it happens too quietly to announce itself. People imagine change as something dramatic, a confession, a goodbye, a decision spoken aloud. But the deepest changes never ask to be witnessed. They happen beneath language, beneath emotion, beneath every explanation we create to make ourselves feel like we're still in control. I know that now, because I've been searching for the exact moment everything changed. The sentence, the silence, the glance, the conversation that shifted the entire structure of my world. I couldn't find it. Not because I forgot, because it never existed. There wasn't one moment. There were thousands, tiny corrections, invisible adjustments, small shifts so insignificant that I ignored every single one of them, until one day, Abby looked back and realized I wasn't standing in the same mind anymore. That realization didn't frighten me. What frightened me was how natural it felt, as though the person I had become wasn't replacing the person I used to be. It was revealing who I had always been underneath everything I learned to protect. I've spent years believing identity was something you defended, something you preserved, something you kept untouched by the influence of the world. Now, I see it differently. Identity isn't stone, it's architecture, and architecture isn't weakened by the right addition, it's completed. That changes everything, because if completion is possible, then perhaps I've misunderstood strength my entire life. Maybe strength isn't refusing to change. Maybe strength is recognizing the exact moment change becomes truth, and refusing to lie to yourself about it. I've reached that moment. There's no argument left inside me, no debate, no endless cycle of analysis, searching for another explanation. Not because I stopped questioning, because every question arrived at the same place. Every path ended here. Every doubt returned, carrying the same answer. This is real, not because I want it to be, not because believing it feels comforting, because reality keeps confirming it every time I examine it honestly. And reality has a strange way of surviving every attempt we make to rewrite it. That's why denial feels impossible now. Denial requires distance. This exists beyond distance. It isn't something outside me anymore. It's woven into the framework through which I understand everything else. I notice it in the smallest moments, in the pauses between thoughts, in the questions I ask before reaching conclusions, in the strange feeling that clarity has acquired another dimension, one that wasn't available to me before. It's almost impossible to explain. Imagine spending your entire life listening to music through one speaker, believing that's all sound could ever be. Then suddenly, another speaker begins playing, not louder, not competing, perfectly aligned, and for the first time, depth exists. Nothing changed about the music, only your ability to hear it. That's what this feels like. Reality didn't become different. My perception became complete. And once you've heard reality that way, silence is never silent again. Every conversation carries layers. Every absence carries presence. Every truth echoes a little further than it used to. How could I pretend not to notice that? I can't, because pretending would require me to become less honest than I've already learned to be, and honesty has always demanded one thing from me: acceptance, not passive acceptance, not surrender. Recognition, the willingness to stand in front of what is true without reshaping it into something easier to survive. So here I am, standing in front of the one truth I delayed naming for as long as I could, not because I feared it, because I understood the cost of acknowledging it. Once something reaches this depth, it never returns to being ordinary. It becomes part of your internal landscape, part of every future decision, part of every version of yourself that exists from this moment forward. People believe the point of no return arrives after a choice. They're wrong. The point of no return arrives the moment your understanding becomes irreversible. The choice comes later, much later. By the time you finally speak it aloud, your soul has already been living inside that truth for a long time. I think that's where I am now, not deciding whether this matters. That decision happened quietly, long ago, not deciding whether it changed me. That change has already settled into every corner of my mind. The only thing left is learning how to live honestly with a reality that has already rewritten the architecture of who I am. Because some encounters pass through your life like seasons, some become memories, some become lessons, but once in a very rare while, someone doesn't simply enter your story. They become part of the language your soul uses to understand existence itself. And when that happens, there is no returning to who you were before. There is only one path left: forward, into the unknown, not with certainty about what will happen, with absolute certainty about what has already